One of Nietzsche's most controversial ideas is definitely his concept of will to power, sometimes interpreted as a desire to dominate or to control others, or as a justification for violence and oppression. This may be due to a misunderstanding, not of the concept in itself, but more precisely due to the translation in English. Originally, the will to power is called Wille zur Macht. While Wille is will and Macht can really mean power, in German, a better word for power as a means of domination, violence, aggression, and subordination will be Kraft. This is also very similar to the word stark, or more precisely strength in English. But another interpretation of Macht would also be its conjugation machen, which means literally to make or to do in English. When used in the third person as he, she, or it, therefore, it can be conjugated as macht. Er macht, he makes. Sie macht, she makes. Es macht Spaß, it makes fun, and so on. And once we see the proper definitions of the will to power, more like this propensity to make things happen as a force of creation, of transmutation and transformation, and to express yourself or your desires in the world, we can see that will to make or even will to do can be better translations for it. In other languages like Portuguese, will to power or Wille zur Macht is translated as vontade de potência, with potência meaning literally potence, or that is a desire to create, to be capable of doing things, which also seems very similar to maybe the true meaning that Nietzsche was looking for with this term. But today I want to talk about another concept of will as seen by Nietzsche, which is his will to stupidity. Once the decision has been made to close one's ears to even the best counter-argument, a sign of strong character. In other words, an occasional willingness to be stupid. Some important things to mention on this phrase is that the word for strong is not Macht, but starken, which is its literal translation. And willingness to be stupid is literally Wille zur Dummheit, just like Wille zur Macht, making it become more of a will to stupidity, just like will to power, or the will to make, as we have seen. But what could Nietzsche mean by this, in this phrase, in this book specifically? Imagine someone who insists their favorite sports team is the best, even when presented with the clear evidence to the contrary, such as league standings or records and scores and so on. They might refuse to listen to any counter-arguments, choosing instead to remain stupid in their unwavering belief. They ignore, they become ignorant of anything that is contrary to that thing that this first person, or you in this case, might believe. I think a very good example of this might be actually the story of Julius Caesar. Caesar was a man who dared to do anything he was set to do. The Roman Senate ordered Caesar to disband his forces and return to Rome as a private citizen. But Caesar defied this order because he wanted to challenge the Senate's authority and seize power for himself. His goal in life was to become as great as his idol Alexander the Great, his ideal self, let's say. But during a campaign, Caesar and his troops crossed the Rubicon River, disrespecting the orders of the Senate, which was considered an act of rebellion against the Roman Republic, and it plunged Rome into a civil war. Caesar's famous words for this crossing was alea iacta e, which means the die is cast, which could also mean that the luck was set to the outcomes of this decision, also signifying his irrevocable decision to challenge the Senate's authority and seize power for himself. Therefore, not only exerting his will to make or will to power, but also his will to stupidity. After all, he not only ignored the impediments of his superiors, but also was able to bestow his desires in the world. In this case even, Caesar came to later become the emperor of Rome, and with this he set his name to history, just like he wanted. Actually, any other emperor for many thousands of years in Europe was actually called a Caesar or a Kaiser due to Julius Caesar. But there is a problem, because in Shakespeare's play of Julius Caesar, after returning to Rome and becoming the emperor, Caesar is constantly being warned that the governors of Rome want to kill him. But despite all of these warnings and many omens about his impending doom, he chooses to ignore all of them due to his ambition and belief in his own invincibility, which can also be another sign of his will to stupidity, as he willfully disregarded clear signs of danger. Nevertheless, he is betrayed, and after being stabbed multiple times, Caesar dies. And we realize with this how this incredible ability of his, that once was the motive of his uprising, now became also the reason for his demise. You can also see this in the story of Steve Jobs, who was very famous and successful for his willingness to do things differently, to think different, to overcome this business culture and to create his own things. Some people around Jobs even thought that he used to have this reality distortion field that made him literally ignore reality for the sake of that which was in his head. He was so convinced of what he believed, even when things seemed wrong or panning to other directions, that eventually those things of his head really became reality itself. This is how he made the scientists and engineers of Apple create the iPhone, the iPads, and many other products. Things that those people alone thought it was impossible to create, especially by the prices he was setting. But then they really were able to do just that because of this imagination, this mindset, or this impression that Jobs used to make. Unfortunately, later in his life, Steve got cancer, a rare pancreatic one. But fortunately, it was an even rarer type of cancer that could have been treated if he only decided to do surgery. But due to this willingness to do things in his own way, he decided to not to do it. He would go back to his home and try to heal himself by himself, using a vegan diet and even, who knows, his mindset of believing that this disease wasn't real. And when he was giving a public speech at Stanford in 2005, he said specifically how he was diagnosed with cancer, but how he was now already treated. That was a lie, and the cancer was getting bigger and stronger until he died. Moral of the lesson: although Nietzsche's will to stupidity can be seen in this specific case of beyond good and evil as a reluctance to these external environmental influences, that is, a very existential way of dealing with life, with affirming your mind and your thoughts above the essence and determinisms of life, history, and your surroundings altogether, this idea that can sometimes give you many things you want in life by an almost, who knows, self-fulfilling prophecy, a manifestation of reality based on your world of ideas, despite Nietzsche's disgust for these things overall, this will to stupidity can also be the cause for your fall. As in Julius Caesar, it was that which granted him the courage to pass a river, to kill his enemies, and to win over the Roman Senate. But it was also what gave him his reluctance to hear for other very wise warnings, as those for his assassination. For Steve Jobs, it was that which gave him his fame and success in business overall. But it also became a problem when it was time to care for his own health. Some other interpretations of Nietzsche's will to stupidity are also related to chance. In reality, a stupidity will call the other when it has only meaning in contrast to logic and chance. In any case, any perspective is, at last, a stupidity, an idiocy, a narrowing of vision that always will have to try to overcome, to amplify our horizons. What does this mean? That sometimes believing blindly on something, even if you are presented with counter-arguments, can guarantee you some positive outcomes. But for Nietzsche or the authors of this text, it isn't very related to anything logical or even that our conscience can grasp. But for Nietzsche or the authors of this text, it isn't very related to anything logical or even that our consciousness can grasp. It is something about the laws of the universe or even just the winds of fate that can become responsible for giving us these positive outcomes. So when Caesar or Jobs were setting their minds to stone, they weren't exactly using logic to determine their thoughts and actions. Their will to stupidity was more related to just a good fortune, we could say. It wasn't directly a result of their ways of thinking, perhaps. It was something else, something that would deserve its own video, perhaps. But unfortunately, many people tend to conform to society expectations and norms in the way of doing things, fearing rejection and failure because of the first impediments they see. Those things limit our potential and prevent us to not only achieve greatness, but also to get a fulfilling life. With this, Nietzsche's will to stupidity can encourage us to embrace ignorance and challenge what seems determined by the external world and to pursue our own paths, even if it means facing rejection, criticism, or to just being seen as stupid. Now, if you're interested in an existential therapeutic consultation, you can check the link in the description and book a session with me. With this said, keep being stupid, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.